Hey everyone, Ben Coomber Radio, episode number 228. Now, I'll tell you what, I actually feel a little bit rusty. Part of me is just slightly nervous. I was going on the UK tour and I sort of did about 6 weeks worth of podcasts. So I literally haven't done a podcast for 6 weeks. I feel a bit virgin again. But it's all good. It's going to be a brilliant show. As you can see, there's some alpha on the other line chuckling away. He's been on the show before a long time ago, very much in the early days of this podcast as it was growing its roots. Phil Graham, welcome back.
Ben, thank you so much for having me.
Mate, dude, it's good to have you. You're always a positive face in fitness. It wasn't that long ago I saw you at SFN Expo where you were also strutting your stuff.
Yeah, we had a great time and it was great to catch up with you. I think we did that podcast about maybe, 4 years ago maybe?
It would have been about 3.5 because the podcast is nearly 4 years old.
Wow.
And I flew over to you. We spent the day together.
We did it in my kitchen, remember that? We did it in the kitchen, we set the audio up and had everything going. That was great.
Yeah. And I didn't spend that much time with you at SFN. We were obviously on that panel together and stuff. I hear you were out. So last week I interviewed Jamie Alderton.
Oh dear.
I think you were out with him.
Yeah, you could say that. Yeah.
Having a couple of jars.
We had a few Diet Cokes and stuff. You know, it was good.
The thing is, at an expo, I can't do that.
It was an eventful night to say the least.
I can't get in at 5 in, be up at 8, and then be on my A game. And I don't know. Yeah, I just wouldn't do it. I don't know. I'm old. I'm too old.
I was just warming up.
Phil, how old are you?
I'm 28 now. I just turned 28.
Shit, so younger than me. Jesus. Right. Anyway, Phil. For people that might not have gone back and seen the show or worked through the podcast, and I can imagine actually the way you introduce yourself now is just a little bit different to how it was kind of 3 or 4 years ago.
Very much so.
Who's Phil Graham? What does he do?
Okay, so basically we'll roll back to when we first met, and back then I was only getting into the fitness industry, so say about 3.5, 4 years ago. I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes when I was 16. And as a result of that led me into studying nutrition and physiology at university and then working for the health service. And I did all of that with the main ambition of trying to improve my own health. Because I had diabetes and I had a choice whether to let it take control of me or for me to control it. And learning about nutrition and physiology was a great way for me to understand the condition, to be able to deal with the symptoms, the management of it. And during that, I fell into exercise. I fell into the weight room, fell into bodybuilding, got a love for it, got a passion for it, and basically started competing. And I did extremely well at a very, very young age, traveled the world with it, the Junior Mr. Universe, Junior Mr. Britain, Junior Mr. World, all the shows that you can imagine at a very young level. I was competing against people that were in the men's category, the seniors, and basically built a very good name for myself. And at the time, I was doing a lot of study on nutrition, and I was talking about it in the local gyms. I just became known as the guy that was always talking about diet and training. And over that time period, the doctors and stuff that I was working with and everyone sort of couldn't believe what I was doing with my diabetes, how I was able to manage that and also be able to go and compete, travel, train, get lean, build muscle and a whole host of things. And I basically obsessed over the control of my diabetes. That's a very rare thing to come across. So all of those behaviors sort of built my profile. And I began speaking at local gyms. I began, as I said, I was working in the health service at the time. And the demand for people wanting me to train them and wanting me to consult with them on diet and lifestyle and a whole host of things based on all the information and study that I'd done had basically taken over my hours outside of work, and it eventually came to me that I had a decision that I could make a full-time career out of it. I could help people, I could make a living out of it, and also as well it was in line with something that I was very interested in. So I had a massive ambition to learn about everything with regards to human body, and that undying motivation was coming from the diabetes, and in turn I was giving that back to people as well. So it was like a win-win situation, and in that respect opportunities have opened up over the years. I mean, endless amount of opportunities working with professional sport in nutrition, writing for most of the, if not all, the major fitness magazines. I've set up my own podcast, sponsorship with various different supplement companies, travel, exhibitions, speaking, public speaking, the whole lot. And now I'm in the midst of just finishing up my first book, which is a book on diabetic muscle and fitness. And that was staring at me the whole time. But I never, ever, believe it or not, talked about my diabetes much. And I think I mentioned that on the first podcast 3.5 years ago. I always kept it to myself. I never wanted to use it as an excuse. And we'll go in today to some of the implications that diabetes can have for exercise and performance and body composition. But I never talked about it. One, it was sort of my way of just getting on with it and dealing with it. Two, I didn't want sympathy. And three, I felt that I had a pretty good control of it, that it didn't interfere with what I was wanting to achieve. So the book basically came about from people contacting me and asking me and saying, look, I can't understand this. My mind's a mess. I can't get in shape. My diabetes is all over the place. I really want to enjoy this. You're very inspirational for you being able to achieve this. And all of this basically hit me in the head one day. This actually Body Power 2.5 years ago. There was a queue of, I think it was like 7 or 8 people with diabetes with pretty much a similar type of question. And those questions were, look, what can we do to be able to perform at a good level and be able to build muscle and lose fat? It was all relating to those kinds of things. And I said to myself, look, I need to help these people. And the information out there at the moment, not to disrespect anyone in the health service, but the information is, one, not from anyone who has a great understanding of exercise physiology, but two, as well, learns to tie diabetes in with that. And there's very few marked examples. I mean, whenever I was growing up, the only guy that I had to reference to was Steve Redgrave, which was a rower, an Olympic rower. And I mean, there was nothing that I could really relate to. The information on looking about muscle building nutrition or fat loss nutrition from a bodybuilding perspective was extremely limited, if not non-existent. And I can remember searching near enough every forum on the internet. We had forums back then. We didn't really have Facebook or Instagram or anything like that, or podcasts as much. And this was, in my sort of 18, 19 year old era when I was competing, and the information was just so limited. So now I've basically solved the solution that I was searching for back then. And we'll be publishing that book on the 16th of October this year. So it's a very exciting time. There's a lot of work that's gone into it, an awful lot of research and experience, evidence-based knowledge, looking through literature, comparing that with personal experience, critiquing it, evaluating it, making really nice, practical, real-life suggestions, along with viewpoints on certain aspects of nutrition and lifestyle. So, yeah.
I love what you do with the book, because like you say, I think there's a perfect niche there. And with a book, you do invest, and this is the way I explain it to people. You're literally putting someone's life experience to date beyond pages. Yeah. And I think sometimes people don't fully appreciate the heart, the blood, sweat and tears and pain that goes into a book. Like, yeah. I'm now finishing off my one for a Christmas release, and you're like, there's so much within those pages. It's literally, and I don't think sometimes people really stand back. And I think you as an author sit there and go, do you know what? I really, really hope this adds to my legacy.
Yeah, big time. And I mean, I'm surprised at the sheer amount of content that I put in it, and I have been strict with myself and saying, right, we'll not go too far on that. And I mean, we got the first edits just back last night actually, and we probably have about another 180 pages. So we'll probably be talking around about 400 pages or so, wow. Just over 60,000 words. So, and that looks at everything from, the pathology of diabetes, mindset, overcoming diabetes and dealing with it, right through to diabetes medication, nutrition, training, lifestyle, supplementation. There's just so many different elements to it. And diabetes is such a complex condition, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. But there's just so many things to consider. And it's like one of those things in the fitness industry when somebody asks you a question then at a seminar and you know that kind of answer, it depends. That is very much a big factor in diabetes, but learning to have the correct filters and the correct frames to sort of put a question in and decipher it and come out with a solution is very important, and that's what I've done with the book the whole way through it. So it's a decision-making thing based on many factors.
Well, I for one can't wait to read it. So talking about diabetes from the top, quickly tell everyone what's the difference between type 1 and type 2, because we've got to start there.
Yeah, well, I mean, we've got different types of diabetes. So we've got type 1, type 2, we've got gestational as well, and there's also rarer forms of diabetes as well, like genetic mutations. But basically, in a nutshell, type 1 is complete deficiency in insulin. Okay, so your body's ability to metabolize and organize fuels is compromised. And not just fuels in terms of carbohydrate, fat, and protein, but also minerals as well. Okay, type 2 is when there is, how could I put it, insulin doesn't do its action as well. So it's got insufficient action, so it's not efficient at what it does. And you'll sometimes hear people have reduced insulin sensitivity. Okay, so the ability for insulin to do its job effectively is compromised due to various different circumstances that go on within the body. Type 1 is an autoimmune related condition in the sense that the body attacks its own specific cells within the pancreas that produce insulin, whereas type 2 is where there are counter-regulatory factors going on that actually interfere with the hormone's ability to do its job. So sometimes obesity can be linked into that, certain environmental toxins can be linked into that, lifestyle behaviors can be linked into that, certain medications can be linked into that. There's a wide range of factors between that. But in a nutshell, the end effects and complications of the poor organization of these fuels results in high levels of blood glucose within the blood, which leads to hyperglycemia. That's the clinical term for it, which has devastating effects within the body. So the only way that I can explain this in a very clear and practical way is if you can imagine the blood vessels within your body as little streams or little tunnels, little fine tunnels, and high blood glucose basically be like pumping sludge through that. And what we tend to see in all the periphery areas of the body, in the things like the eyes and the kidneys, is we see all these little vessels burst. And there's a mass amount of oxidative stress above and beyond normal levels. We see things like glycation, which is a combining of protein to glucose, and alterations in certain structures of organs and cells within the body that are very destructive. And basically it's like a massive health implication for anybody that wants to live a good well-being or good quality life. So it can be managed, type 1 diabetes, through lifestyle and most importantly medication. Type 2 can be managed through predominantly lifestyle, but there also may be the need for medication if it's not looked after. So type 2 can sort of be controlled in a sense largely without going on the likes of injectable insulin, but it's very down to the individual's level of personal control, whereas type 1 medication is inevitable. So
looking at this framework of type 2, which is really where the large amount of modern day influence can be had, especially with the information you're putting out, you made a choice, and this has stuck with me. When you were introing yourself, you made a choice to not let diabetes control you.
Yeah.
So what you're now saying is people with type 2 have a choice. You optimize your health, and really diabetes has a minor effect on your health, or you don't, and it has a major effect on your health, and you have to then make time for it further down the line as it influences and affects other areas and physiology of the body.
100%. So it's not the kind of condition where you wait until the shit hits the fan, basically. And it's very important to intervene with the appropriate lifestyle interventions before you get to the later stages and progression of type 2, where you may need glucose disposal agents, you may eventually need injectable insulin. To get to those stages is neglect of one's lifestyle factors, which are a 24/7 thing. Everybody listening to this podcast has a choice within the next 10 to 5 minutes or 1 second of how they're going to conduct the rest of their day. And is that cohesive with good quality health? Is it going to impair your health? You know, you need to ask yourself these quality questions before you eat, before you lie on the couch, before you take something, etc., etc. So, yeah, it's very much personal accountability for all aspects of diabetes.
Okay, so a lot of people come to you and they're basically saying, Phil, I've got diabetes, it's type 2, it can be managed, I want to make improvements with my body composition, my health. From a top line going down, how do you then circumnavigate this big question? What should people be doing to effectively manage their health and body composition with type 2?
Well, it depends for a start if the individual has it from a primarily lifestyle factor in the sense of eating too much, because we can also have type 2 diabetes where individuals are normal weight and it could be caused by certain medications or certain environmental toxins, etc. But for example, with the main bulk of type 2 diabetes cases where the individual is overweight, looking to control energy balance and increase energy output is a massive asset to health. So if we take, for example, Joe Bloggs as an example, who sits in a lorry, has multiple packets of crisps, is highly inactive, maybe smokes, binge drinks at the weekend and consumes an awful lot of energy but has a very low level of activity and eventually gets hit with type 2 diabetes. We can meet that individual where they're at and start coaxing in some habit changes. For example, we could maybe put a pedometer on the wrist and get them to meet a minimum threshold of 5,000 steps per day instead of sitting about and maybe doing 1,500. So little small changes like that, even using a standing desk, for example, over a seated desk is a massive change in musculature and energy output. So even subtle little lifestyle changes like that can have an absolute massive effect on the body's ability to resist or overcome type 2 diabetes. And the mechanisms behind that are fairly complex, but in a nutshell, basically with type 2 diabetes, the pancreas is overproducing insulin to try and get the job done because it is not doing the job at the cell level efficiently. So the pancreas is placed under stress. Now, whenever we look at contracting muscle tissue, whether we look at conserving energy, and whether that's through physical activity or a reduction in calorie intake, we technically put a brake on that stressful response. Okay, so if we look at, say, a weight training session, for example, somebody starts doing some basic weighted carries if they've never exercised before, or kettlebell swings or some goblet squats or something like that, the muscle tissue will become almost like a sponge where it will basically take up glucose pretty much independent of insulin because of a certain biochemical response that goes on within it. And as a result of that, if we can frequently stimulate that response over time, that is going to basically do a little bit of the job that the insulin would have been doing and give a break there. Now, if we can also tie in a reduction in calorie intake, because if we look at an individual that is chronically, that means long-term over-consuming calories, carbohydrates, proteins, fats, doesn't matter, not just specifically from one nutrient, but generally speaking, we see that insulin is continually being pumped out to try and accommodate that fuel. And if we can look at utilizing certain techniques within nutrition, a reduction in calorie intake, maybe things like intermittent fasting, for example, giving the body a temporary break or reduction in the amount of calories coming in is going to reduce that stress that the pancreas is under. We also see as well with people that are obese or overweight is what a lot of people don't realize is fat tissue is basically an endocrine gland as well. So it secretes basically a lot of, how could I put it very simply, toxic or negative substances that interfere with the signaling of the body's chemicals and hormones. So again, if we can look at reducing body fat from that sense, we can look at reducing energy intake, and we can look at also increasing physical activity in a sustainable manner, that is in turn going to have a massive effect on cleaning up some of the side effects of type 2 diabetes.
I think what's interesting here is when we as fitness professionals talk a lot about things that are very much kind of almost linked to disease and linked to issues, we're very quick to talk about nutrition. And while we are very focused on nutrition, we sometimes underestimate the power of exercise a little bit. And actually the physiology that happens when we do an exercise session, you're now talking about the body utilizing carbohydrate effectively, having an absorptive and utilization effect at a cellular level. And actually, it isn't just 80% nutrition, 20% exercise. There is a massive component here for exercise.
Massive, yeah. And I mean, we also, have to consider like weight training, for example. We've got an increase in the ability to store carbohydrates. Obviously, muscle size increases. We've got an increased ability to create a sink for glucose. We also have the increase in a specific transporter called GLUT4, which comes to the surface and works to take carbohydrate out of the blood and into the muscle cell. We also see the fact that muscle tissue will increase metabolic rate when somebody sits at rest. And also as well, we've got the whole psychological aspect of actually looking better. Then the actual fact of burning calories in an exercise session as an individual gets stronger and stronger and stronger. And that needs to be balanced, in line with recovery, in line with lifestyle factors. So we see things like sleep being massive in diabetes management. We see things like mindful living as well. With diabetes, the body is under chronic long-term stress 24/7 if it is not controlled. So it's a very nasty health complication if left out of order. So there's a degree of paranoia that needs to exist within someone with diabetes to know that once they're outside their normal physiological blood glucose range, that their health is at jeopardy. So, I suppose that's probably one of the main takeaways for any diabetics listening on the podcast, or if you have a family member. But knowing as soon as you go outside that range for a prolonged period of time, you are taking years off your life. You're taking time off your life. And, you got to question yourself every time you're there. You got to be responsive. You've got to be adaptive. You've got to keep a calm head. You've got to know your condition. And the problem is a lot of people with diabetes do not understand what is actually going on. And it's a constant battle of juggling balls and trying to balance things and taking injections and hoping for the best. And I mean, there's just so many things that somebody with diabetes has to consider. On the aspect of type 2, type 1s also use injectable insulin, and with every single drug comes a side effect. So with injectable insulin, there's a massive increase in hypoglycemia risk, which is basically low levels of blood glucose where the brain ceases to function as well. And that's a massive increase in injury potential. I mean, you could take a hypoglycemia and not coordinate your thoughts too well and step out in front of a bus or a car. Yeah. You could fall in the gym. And also as well, from a body composition point of view, taking hypoglycemia all the time needs carbohydrate to bring blood glucose levels back up. And if you are treating all the time, you're consuming extra energy. And as a result of that, you are potentially going to hinder your ability to lose fat and get lean, which could further complicate the condition. We also see as well from if blood glucoses aren't controlled without insulin and an individual goes hyperglycemic, what happens is there's various changes that go on within the body chemistry. More specifically for the diabetic that's interested in fitness or muscle building, muscle tissue breaks down as a fuel source. So I always used to get people saying to me, oh, you're only a good bodybuilder because you take insulin, you're only a good bodybuilder because you're diabetic, you can manipulate your insulin. Bullshit. If you have diabetes, it is a catabolic disease. End of. When your blood glucose goes high, your performance goes down, your increased risk of dehydration, your electrolyte metabolism is affected, muscle chemistry is affected, mental cognition is massively affected. We also see in people with diabetes with poor blood glucose control that we see an increase in glycation around the joints, so mobility is compromised. So again, if mobility is compromised, how is that going to have an effect on performance? There's just so many negatives that can occur that need to be respected, and knowing that if control is improved, that these will regress or stay at bay, so to speak. So that's a massive thing to consider for people with diabetes.
Incredible. So people should be moving, they should be exercising. If they can do some kind of resistance training, perfect. This is all powerful stuff. Now moving on to the diet side of things, there's always talk around kind of obviously improving your diet, but then looking at the big carbohydrate factor, like should there be carbs in the diet? Does it matter because you're going to take insulin anyway? Should we be low carb dieting because that's then going to control our insulin? Where do people need to look for clarity on the nutrition side of things from a top level?
Okay, well, I mean, there's various different aspects to consider. First of all, we have to look at the theories behind reducing carbohydrates, and you suggested some very valid things there. First of all, in relation to less carbohydrates means less insulin, means less need to manage, basically, so to speak. So there's potential less use of insulin, which in turn reduces the risk of hypoglycemia. We also see, like in certain countries like the US, where you have to pay for your medication, a reduction in insulin could also be good on the wallet. Also as well, the fact that you're directly reducing the substrate that causes hyperglycemia, which is high blood glucose, one of the main factors that influences blood sugar, is a massive thing. But you have to remember, it depends on context, Ben. So we got to look at what are the goals of the individual. If it's an individual with diabetes who wants to train and exercise, we have to look at the performance. So if we're going to cut carbohydrates significantly and somebody's on a high volume training regime or is maybe looking to put on weight, for example, some people with type 1 diabetes, for example, are underweight. Remember, diabetes is an undernutrition based disease where in fact the fuels can't get in to serve their purpose. So, I mean, we're also restricting a whole food group there if we take that out. So we're potentially losing out on a lot of the fiber, the vitamins, the minerals that are associated with carbohydrates. Provided energy balance is accounted for in the sense that it's not allowing an individual to gain excessive quantities of fat, which in turn would be detrimental to health and promote obesity. Carbohydrates can be included within an individual that's highly active. An individual that's not active, what about carbohydrate consumption there? Well, it all depends on food preference. It depends on their ability to measure blood glucose and respond appropriately and also dose appropriately as well. So, if I'm going to take carbohydrates and not inject my insulin or take the appropriate medication to cover that, then yes, by all means, that's going to be unhealthy. But there's no need to restrict carbohydrate if you are managing, assessing, exercising, you're active, you're putting carbohydrate to good use, you're respecting energy balance, you're respecting a diverse and varied diet. There's just so many different things there that, you have to take into account. But I know there are some very hardcore advocates of zero carbohydrate intake in people with diabetes, but then again, these people don't exercise. And it's usually people that are, preaching off one page or one diet book, for example. I think there's a group on Facebook, I can't remember what the name of it is. The Blood Sugar Solution is the name of the book, where it's basically a very low carbohydrate book. But again, for the diabetic that's 18 to 35-year-old that wants to build muscle and, go and train 4 to 5 times a week or, compete on a bodybuilding stage or compete in extreme levels of sport, trying to do that without carbohydrate is going to be problematic. So we need to have that in there, 1, for performance, 2, for hypoprevention capacity, and, also as well personal preference, adherence to diet. So there's various things to consider there. From a type 2, we got to look at the individual that's overweight, for example. Carbohydrates aren't going to affect appetite too much. They're quite easy to overeat. And again, that depends what they're combined with and the type of food source. So if you've got high quality carbohydrate sources that tend to be higher in fiber, more wholesome, more filling, that's a much better preference than utilizing basically junk carbohydrates that are going to be in and out of the system, that don't fill us up, that don't provide minimal nutrition. But again, you have to look at the whole thing in perspective. So, I mean, looking at, keeping full, keeping appetite at bay is a massive factor in obesity. Tying it in with adherence as well, tying it in with performance, again, is a massive thing in type 2. So again, as I said, not all type 2s are overweight. But from the obesity perspective, we need to be choosing foods predominantly that are going to fill us up. And then we run into issues with protein and kidney health and diabetes. So, if you're trying to eat a higher protein intake and you've got a malfunctioning kidney, which is one of the main side effects of poorly controlled diabetes, you have to be mindful of that. So you start to see now how there's a lot of intricacies and different elements. A lot of people with diabetes, including myself, have perfectly healthy kidneys. But I mean, my diet is very varied in carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. I tend to now eat slightly higher carbohydrate Purely just at this period of time in my life, I'm just enjoying carbohydrates a little bit more. No real specific scientific reason for that. Yeah, from a fat loss perspective, I will predominantly consume more protein because of its ability to fill me up.
Yeah. Interesting.
So,
Last point on the nutrition side of things, you mentioned this earlier and it piqued my interest because I've not actually, I am by no means well versed in diabetes. It's a key reason to get you onto the show. You mentioned issues potentially with micronutrition.
yeah.
Now, I hadn't sort of heard about this because my lack of exploration. Where do the problems lie? Is it from a malnutrition perspective?
Yeah, well, I mean, you look at the stress that diabetes imposes on the body, and all of these little overreactions, basically with oxidative stress, glycation, place a massive burden on the system. And we need antioxidants. We need a whole host of things to help repair and mop up damage. Basically, the need for nutrients is increased because the body is under increasing stress. We even see that from an electrolyte perspective. When somebody has high blood glucose, they begin to urinate out electrolytes. So we need to replenish those. So if you look from an exercise perspective, when you're already sweating, you're already leaching out electrolytes, and you've now got hyperglycemia, which is adding to that. The replenishment of those electrolytes is imperative for recovery, is imperative for energy and normal metabolism. So you have to bear that in mind. With the worse the control, the greater the need, or the greater the, how could I put it, awareness needs to be that you may need to replace certain, micronutrients. But again, it's very hard to give you an exact blueprint for that, because everybody's different times of the day. You would need a snapshot blood shot to be able to suggest anything. Yeah. So it's just being mindful of that. You walk around all day with your blood glucose between 4 and 8, whereas I could go up to maybe 13 or 14, maybe for half an hour. Somebody with really bad diabetes could go up to 25 and sit there all day. So you can imagine the stress that's on their system. Yeah. The way I always describe hyperglycemia is how you feel after a Christmas dinner. Multiply that by 5.
Okay.
So we also see with diabetes is it has a massive effect on mood. Okay. Blood sugar swings from high to low to normal will have a tremendous effect on mood. So when I go high, and a high for me is 10. The reference range is, on average, is very basically is between around about 4.2 and 7.4. When I go high, and a high for me is about 11 or 12 millimoles per litre. Again, different areas of the country, different places in the world will measure. Some places will measure in milligrams per deciliter, but just generally speaking, we'll reference to 4 and 7. So when I go high, I get very frustrated, very much a lot of brain fog, very hard to concentrate, very agitated. When I go low, I get very tired, very sleepy, very drowsy, and it can get quite snappy as well. So, trying to deal with all that stuff going on is, along with normal life, I've had to train myself mentally to be very, very calm and collect. And that is a massive skill, being mindful of how you're thinking. I've never once thrown the head up and said I wish I didn't have diabetes. Never once. I don't get frustrated with it. I know that this is just part of my identity, and I just have to roll with it. And that's a very... to be able to come to that point and be able to say that with confidence and clarity has taken a lot of training with myself. And when I started, I was obsessed over control. And I think that's paid massive dividends as to the mindset that I have now, and understanding it, because I know why my blood glucose will respond. There'll be a lot of people with diabetes listening to this that will go in and exercise and not understand why their blood glucose levels will fluctuate, and they'll come out of exercise thinking, I've just wasted my time, that was pointless. Or they'll take a low in the middle of the exercise session, and then they'll have to sit at the side for 30 minutes. So you can imagine there's a lot of social exclusion, a lot of paranoia going out with I use pens for my diabetes, so I'm just going to hold up the camera. That's my pancreas, technically. Yeah. Okay, so a lot of people will use pumps. I don't use a pump, never have, never will. I just use pens. People going out to meals, going out to nightclubs, social events, and you know, you're chatting up a girl and you've got a high blood glucose and, you know, you're starting to sweat and you've got brain fog and you've maybe got alcohol in there as well. There's so many things to consider. You know, you're going out on a night out, you're taking a low or you take your insulin and the food's late or the waiter drops the plates on the ground and then you have to sit and hold a formal discussion. So there's so many different circumstances that can arise from it. But you know, that you got to learn to react to those, and you know.
Well, I love this because we've talked so much about mindset of recent on the podcast, and it translates into anything. And you know, you've just said that diabetes is a part of you. Done. That's it. It's my identity. I'm going to optimize it. I'm going to live with it. That is part of Phil Graham's identity, and the amount of people that cannot accept that something that's not perfect is part of them. Like, for me, I can't straighten my right arm. Do I keep trying to fix it? Of course I do. I'm on a journey with it every day. I've been doing it for 12 years. But currently, it's part of my identity.
I think I remember that, actually. I think I remember you saying about that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and we're now looking at exploratory surgery to see if there's impingement within the cavity that the elbow is straightened in. But it doesn't matter. I'm not going to sit here and go, oh, boo-hoo. Like, you know, I've just got to get on with it. It's part of what is.
Definitely.
See, and another point I wanted to pick up on, you now correlated. So in the fitness industry, we talk all the time about body composition, performance, that kind of stuff. For me, the way I teach nutrition, it's about how it can affect every area of your life. And you've just picked up on so many aspects of our life that we don't fully appreciate that can be affected, about dating other people, concentrating at work, being mindful around loved ones, like all these things. Like if you didn't manage your diabetes, you would have a low quality of life, not from a health perspective,
so, 100%,
but from a social, economic perspective as well.
Yeah, big time. I mean, you know, if I look at some of the diets that people with diabetes have or the lifestyle regimes, I mean, I eat to be able to perform. Clearly, like I said, to exercise now is nowhere near as serious as what it was for me back when I was competing. Now it's purely for maintenance of health and aesthetic appearance. It's not for any competitive means, but you know, I have standards, and those standards each week are to train a minimum of 4 days, to do a minimum of 5,000 steps per day, to do a minimum of 30 minutes mobility a day, to always be mindful of the calories that I consume, and if I overconsume on a number of days, that I'll compensate somewhere else. And the reason why I do that is because I have a shape and a level of blood glucose control and a level of confidence about my appearance and health that I need to maintain, and those are the processes that allow me to do that.
So talk to me just about your segue in training. Like bodybuilding was a massive part of your career at early doors. You're now just training to be you. Like what changed? Was there a moment? Was there a social factor, an environmental factor, or was it just like, I need to stop bodybuilding, I've had my time? Yeah,
well, I mean, with the bodybuilding, the truthful honest for that was I placed second place in a show where I should have placed first, and it was a political decision in my opinion, and I was told that, and I'd put so much time and effort into that preparation, and I'd been and heard and been already involved in political decisions previous, and to be honest, it wasn't a solid investment of time and energy to get something out of it that I needed. That was going to be beneficial to me. If anything, it was stealing time and energy from me. That was never going to be a wise investment. So basically, my business was growing at the same time. I was still studying at the time, and I just channeled all the energy into that. My training went from a very, obviously back when I was bodybuilding as well, my knowledge of nutrition and training was a lot more limited compared to what it is now. And obviously that's just common sense. Basically over time with reading and experience and mistakes, they've all been refined and learned from. But basically the training back then was very, very strict, very rigid, very much my life was controlled by my training and my diet. A part of that was education based. A part of that was eating purely for function as a bodybuilder. I wasn't really interested in socializing with food. I was only interested in eating nutrients. I wasn't interested in, you know, adhering to a diet. I was interested in just getting the job done for the show, and that was my mindset at the time. I never saw it as, how can I put it, lifestyle. If you ask a bodybuilder or you hear a bodybuilder, you'll always hear it's only 10 weeks to the show, it's a year to the show, it's 16 weeks to the show, 3 weeks to the show. They have a lifespan on their results and their ability to maintain that. So I basically, now if you were to ask me about timescales and everything, there is none. Training now is very much highly productive, efficient training that I get done to train my body as a whole. Even when I was bodybuilding, I was training pretty much in quite a smart way, where I wasn't just training for body parts, I was training movement. I always looked after my mobility. A lot of bodybuilders will just go in and train isolated body groups and body parts and not look after mobility, and they wonder why they can't move, or they wonder why they end up with so many injuries. So looking at that respect was massive for me. Fitness is a massive thing for me now, cardiovascular fitness, which was something that would have only peaked for me during contest preparation when I was getting lean. Also as well, my appearance now as well, learning to keep myself as lean as physically possible as I can year round, not just from an aesthetic perspective, but the leaner I am from a diabetic perspective, the better my insulin works, the better my blood glucoses are managed. So there's a reason behind that, and you know that's my standard now. Whereas before, I would have maybe got very large in the off season. It would have been purely about calorie consumption, rest, training frequency. I still train very hard. I don't train balls to the wall every day like I used to. I very much auto-regulate and periodize my training on the day, how I feel. Beforehand, I would have periodized on an Excel spreadsheet for 6 months, irrespective if I had a cold or not. I had to be dying if I wasn't going to train. And, mentally to overcome not following something that was down on structure or paper was very hard. So now, if I miss a training session, I know I can do it the day after. I know I can compensate elsewhere. I still am fairly disciplined with it. But as I say, I've got my own gym in the house now, and I'm not really busy with work and reading and getting this book finished. That, time is very important to me, and to be able to go down and just perform particular exercises that are going to benefit me, benefit my health, benefit my productivity for the day, is important to me. So it's purely just maintenance now. Yeah. I'm not chasing any size, I'm not chasing any mass, whereas beforehand it would have been constantly increasing calories, increasing training frequency and everything else, and it's a monotonous task. And bodybuilding as well, for all the bodybuilders listening, and I'm sure there's plenty, bodybuilding is ruled by genetics, and I had okay genetics, but realistically, I was never going to be Mr. Olympia. Even if I got on the Olympia stage, I'd be a shit pro, and a lot of bodybuilders do not understand that or respect that. If you do not have the genetics, you tend to find there's overcompensation with drug use, training, everything in the amateur ranks, much more so than the professional ranks. So it's funny whenever you get to travel to these expos and meet a lot of the pro bodybuilders and stuff like that, but the actual abuse and use of substances, for example, in professional bodybuilders is so much lower and casual compared to some of the stuff in the amateur ranks, because guys are trying to compensate and make up for crappy genetics by hammering stuff. And that's not just supplements, that's also training. They're like, if you knew some of the pro guys and some of the stuff that they do with their lifestyle, how lazy they are, and you look at the sheer colossal size, and people just go, that's all drugs. No, genetics is a massive component in that. That was another turning point where you're maybe, fighting an uphill battle to a degree, because we all know the guy when we were in school, or the girl that stays lean no matter what they eat, that, is incredibly strong. Like when I look back at school, there was this guy that was always ripped, and he used to just eat, Space Raider crisps all the time. And then there was a guy that was really strong, just like super strong, never trained, just a stocky guy, just built. And, it's actually learning to understand that everyone is physiologically and biomechanically at an advantage or disadvantage or on just a normal level. So, looking at it from a genetic perspective, from a political decision, and basically, like the amount of time and effort to get ready for a show is time consuming, and it's costly, and it's costly on relationships, it's costly on finance, it's costly on work. In education, I was studying in university at the time, and I prepped for 3 major competitions over that time period, and to look at jeopardizing certain things for a plastic trophy was not in any way, shape or form a wise investment for me anymore. And looking at it now, I can stay in incredible condition, stay lean, stay active, stay strong, stay healthy, and not be under pressure. And also as well with bodybuilding, you tend to get an awful lot of armchair critics that have never competed before that look and judge how you are. But again, going up on a bodybuilding stage is really asking for it, isn't it? You're going up there to be criticized on your appearance, so you have to have a hard shell to be able to accommodate that. But a lot of things with the environment, with bodybuilding, I was sort of against as well, and grew into. And I mean, I've been right from the hardcore side of bodybuilding to the professional side, the back end hardcore gyms to the commercial goals gyms. I've seen and been pretty much everywhere with it. I'm still very passionate about it, still very passionate about strength training, but from the competitive perspective, it does not appeal to me in the slightest anymore.
Nice. I love that. And it's all about you. It's no one else. It's just your goals, your transition, your journey. And it's brilliant. 100%. And hopefully people have learned that by listening to you today. Phil, you're always a pleasure to talk to. Your dulcet tones as well. Your book, are you going to be doing an audio version?
I've thought about that.
I think you should.
You think I should hire somebody in for that?
No, you shouldn't. You cannot not do your own audiobook. I hate listening to audiobooks where the author hasn't read it because you don't get the passion.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah,
you've got a good voice.
The other night and getting it set up on Audible. So that's definitely going to be a big possibility.
Do it.
Definitely.
Do it. All right, Phil. For people that would love to grab a copy of the book, the Diabetic Blueprint, I believe.
The Diabetic Muscle and Fitness Guide. It was actually called the Diabetic Blueprint, but basically, long story short, the story behind that was I announced it, and within about 4 weeks, somebody messaged me, and somebody put up a pop-up website, which was basically a cheap stab at plagiarising it, and
Jesus.
they'd taken up the website space for it, and it looked awful. So I thought, from a searchability perspective, the Diabetic Muscle and Fitness Guide was going to be a much better and sensible option anyway. So we went with that. The book itself will be available on Amazon.com and Amazon.co.uk, but more specifically my website, diabeticmuscleandfitness.com, where you can get the e-guide or the real book. For international orders, Amazon's probably the best, or you can get the e-book guide from my site. The site as well, within the next 4 weeks after the book is launched, there'll be a membership site, and that membership site will be exclusively for individuals that are serious about strength training, with type 1 diabetes, type 2 diabetes, body composition, performance, and just everything to do with health and fitness. In diabetes, cycling is actually a massive sport, endurance-based sport, but I'll not be covering that kind of detail. It's specifically for body composition, strength training-based stuff. So, it's a kind of resource I wish I had whenever I was first diagnosed. So, it's going to be a lot of value in it.
Sounds incredible. And for people to look you up on the social space, you're kind of Phil Graham in most places, right?
Phil Graham. I think I remember you taking the mick out of me for Phil Graham 01 back in the day, because Phil Graham was taken. I think you had Ben Coomber, you had it sealed up.
I did.
Phil Graham 01 on Instagram. I'm very active on Instagram, and I'm extremely active on Snapchat. Snapchat have a big following in that. And then also my mailing list as well, phil-graham.com, my main site. my podcast as well, Elite Muscle Radio. We put out a show once a month or every 3 weeks with some of the best. I'll have to get you on as well, Ben, at some stage. So yeah, that's where you can reach me on all those channels, and feel free to ask me anything. I'll be there, and love to respond to you.
Awesome. There you go, everyone. Grab a copy of the book. If you don't have diabetes, that doesn't matter. Grab the book. You're going to learn some stuff, especially if you're a coach, especially if you're a trainer, because this is essential knowledge. Look Phil Graham up on social space. Look Phil's podcast up. There's a wealth of information out there, just like I've done. Phil, thank you very much again for the show.
No problem. And just on a side note, what you said there about personal trainers, I actually have a chapter dedicated to trainers on personal training someone with diabetes. So yeah, that's a perfect context for reading material, with type 2 being one of the biggest diseases nowadays you'll come across as a coach. So yeah, it's all there.
Nice. Right, podcast listeners, this will go out in the usual spaces. Please engage with me and Phil when it comes out. If you see a tweet, tell us what you liked. Say thanks to Phil. If you see it on Facebook, again, just engage with us. Engage with the environment. We're putting ourselves out there to help you, and we will help if you ask for more information, always. Have an awesome day with whatever you're doing. Keep progressing yourself. Keep progressing on your journey. No one else's, your journey. And I'll be back next week with another guest. That's goodbye from me.
And goodbye from me. Take care.
See you, everyone.